Good morning, fellow freedom fighters. This is the Real Canadian Liberal Podcast, where we talk about freedom and liberty, real liberalism, the liberalism based in egalitarian universalism, the idea that every human has equal intrinsic value, and there are therefore bestowed on them certain intrinsic, inalienable human and civil rights. And the philosophical tradition that surrounds that goes back 800 years. It's called the rule of law and equality before the law in our British Commonwealth tradition. And that's what we're going to discuss. I'm your host. I'm Stuart Stoudinger. I'm a retired British and Canadian military officer. And I'm also an applied scientist, conservationist, regenerative rancher right here in central Alberta. And I'd like to discuss with you today a little bit about freedom, a little about the rule of law and equality before the law, what it means to me and what it should mean to you. So first I'll start with what it means to me. I'll just show you what it means to me. This is my uniform. This is the dress uniform that I marched off the parade square in officer training back in early 1997. And these medals here, they may represent to some people some of the stuff that I achieved and did in my career. What they represent to me is the sacrifice of 7 friends and colleagues that didn't get to come home. They weren't all close friends of mine, but some of them were. They were all good guys, and they didn't come home. They gave their lives for freedom. They gave their lives for the rule of law and equality before the law. 3 of them were fathers of young children, left young families behind. They all left loved ones, whether it's girlfriends or wives, children, mums, dads, cousins, sisters, brothers. They all left people behind. And they didn't die from any natural cause or accident. In the normal world, they didn't die in car accidents. They didn't die from influenza or cancer or anything else. They died for one reason only, because they were willing to risk their lives for your freedom. They were willing to risk their lives for the freedom of people who would not do the same for them. That's the caliber of people they were. And Canada has 129,000 names that are in that same category. That's 129,000 people who died not through any other reason other than that they were willing to die to defend the foundations of our society, fundamental human rights and civil liberties and the rule of law and equality before the law. That's why they died. My last squadron was a squadron in Bomber Command during World War II. They lost 933 personnel during the war, either missing, killed, or prisoners of war. The total death toll at the end was over 400 dead. One squadron, flying bombers. They had 12 bombers on that squadron at full strength, and they lost over 400 personnel dead. Just one squadron in Bomber Command. Bomber Command lost 55,000 of my predecessors died in the skies over Europe, fighting totalitarian fascism and National Socialism. That's what freedom means. Freedom is something that you enjoy because of a terrible cost paid by other people. And I'm not expecting you to pay that price. Some people in the future will have to pay that price. That's the cost of it. But I'd just like you to appreciate what that freedom has cost. When we stand on November 11th and say, lest we forget, we're not just remembering that people died. We're remembering what they died for. And right now, in our country and in our province, the rule of law and the equality before the law that those people, those 129,000 Canadians died for, has been subverted. It's been broken. It's the first time in the British Commonwealth that the rule of law has broken down since the English Civil War. The breakdown of rule of law is no laughing matter. So when you're out protesting these violations on fundamental human rights, protesting the fact that the government has not followed the due process of law required by them of Section 1 of the Constitution in order to suspend or limit any of your freedoms or liberties, that's what you're protesting. You're protesting that they did not follow the due process of law. They did not clearly articulate what they were doing or why they were doing it. They did not vote for it in the legislature after a clear debate, an open debate on the subject. They have never publicly consulted any of the world's leading scientists from Stanford, Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, Mainz, Stockholm, Cape Town, who have said that this is absolutely nuts. They haven't consulted any of the scientists who rewrote the World Health Organization's pandemic guidelines in 2019 and said of all these non-pharmaceutical interventions, about 4 of them might be handy. Washing your hands, not going to visit the elderly when you're symptomatic. Simple common sense things that we do every single winter. But all the other ones, they know full well that A, they don't work. They don't stop transmission. They can delay it slightly, perhaps by a week or 2. We're a long way past a week or 2. A long way past a week or 2. They can delay them slightly. They cannot stop viral transmission using medieval, and I'm saying these are medieval, anti-scientific ideas. They don't work. They never have worked, they never will work. The science on that's clear. We had 23 scientific papers by the end of September last year confirming that. That's just between March last year and September last year, 23 scientific papers. So our government, when they brought these things back in the fall this last year, they knew that the body of evidence, the body of science was against them. By the end of the year, there were 30 papers confirming that. There's been a dozen or so since. They cannot justify their actions in a court of law using the science. They've never talked to Dr. John Ioannidis, the world's most highly ranked life scientist. He's the world's leading epidemiologist. There is no one on earth who is more cited than John Ioannidis. No one. The World Health Organization publishes his work on their own website. So it's not as though he is some sort of crank or quack. He's it. And he's been ignored by our government. There has been no public debate. The scientists have never been brought in. We've never seen the Alberta government consult any of these world-leading scientists. The people who wrote the original guidelines and the people who have done all the science and run all the numbers. We've got a virus that's absolutely deadly for a small sector of the population. If you've got metabolic disease, some sort of immune compromise system problem, elderly and frail, it's deadly. There's no doubt about it. But for everyone else, it's less deadly than seasonal flu. Seasonal flu kills children, it kills pregnant women, it kills young people. This doesn't. It kills a very, very small demographic. And guess what? Alberta Health knows who all those people are. They could easily have protected them, but they haven't. Canada ranks 30th out of the 30 most affluent nations on earth in terms of protection of the vulnerable demographics. 30th, that's dead last. We have an absolutely terrible record. We have let people die who didn't need to die, and in the process of shutting down all the people who weren't vulnerable, we've destroyed the rule of law in Canada. It's that simple. So when you're out there and you're talking to your fellow travelers, you're talking to other people, you're talking to law enforcement, well, they're not really law enforcement anymore. Unfortunately, it's you. The people protesting are law enforcement because you're the ones trying to enforce the law, because the people who are supposed to enforce the law are breaking it. And the courts who are supposed to enforce the law are helping them. But remind them, there's this thing called the Nuremberg Principles. I'm just going to bring them up here. This is Nuremberg Principle 4. The fact that a person acted pursuant to the order of his government or of a superior does not relieve him from responsibility under international law, provided a moral choice was in fact possible to him. That means unless you have a gun to your head, or there is a gun to the head of someone else that you know, you don't get to break the law. You don't get to suspend human rights and civil liberties without due process unless you're under threat of grievous bodily harm or death, or someone you know is. Saying, I was told to follow the rules or I'd get fired is not an excuse. It wasn't an excuse in the Nuremberg trials. It hasn't been an excuse in any of the international tribunals since. Slobodan Milosevic and all his pals, they tried it. Bruno Day last year, a convicted SS camp guard, didn't get away with it. He was 93 years old. Justice has a long memory. So right now, doesn't matter who you are, you have to follow this principle. And you need to, when you're out there, remind the people around you and remind the law enforcement that you talk to that they're on the wrong side of history if they're enforcing these laws. They're not only on the wrong side of history, they're on the wrong side of the law. What they're doing is criminal. And they need to stop. And they need to tell their superiors, no, you don't get to break the law without due process. The RCMP cannot arrest someone for bank robbery and hold them indefinitely without bringing charges and putting them in front of a jury of their peers. It's illegal. The due process of law must occur, and the same thing needs to happen in a public emergency. The due process of law outlined in Section 1 of the Canadian Charter needs to be followed. It hasn't, therefore, what is occurring is illegal. And 129,000 Canadians have given their lives for that rule of law and the equality before the law and the human rights and civil liberties that are codified in that law. So, when you're out there, you're standing for freedom. You're standing alongside the memories of the people who we remember when we stand on November 11th and say, lest we forget. Because when we say that, we're not just remembering the fact they died, we're remembering what they died for. So when you're standing out there and you're protesting a breakdown of the rule of law and illegal government mandates that have never been justified through the due process of law, you're standing alongside the finest our society has ever produced. You're standing alongside 7 of my friends and colleagues. You're standing on behalf of 3 families of children who grew up without their dads. So please remember that. Don't get violent. That's what some of these idiots want. But if there's 10,000 of us, as Alexandra Solzhenitsyn said, if there are 10,000 of us willing to stand up, they can't stop us. We can regain a society where we have the rule of law and equality before the law and fundamental human rights and civil liberties respected, and where the due process of law is the only way that any of those things is ever broken. But it requires us all to stand. We just need to stand. So, I'm putting this online. You guys are out there. We're all doing our part. But the memory of 129,000 Canadians relies on us to win. Because if we lose, November 11th this year means nothing. And for me, that's a personal affront on the memories of my friends. So I'll leave that with you and wish you good luck and Godspeed in your efforts. Thank you very much.